Xin chào các bạn. Welcome to my first YouTube video explaining how the Vietnamese language is written. My name is Adam, but I also go by the Vietnamese name Ba. I first studied Vietnamese over 30 years ago when I was in the Navy, and I worked for a number of years investigating cases of military personnel missing from the Vietnam War. In that capacity, I traveled throughout Vietnam, so I've been exposed to many of the regional dialects. When I decided to make this video, I was initially thinking of the many younger Vietnamese people who already speak and understand Vietnamese, but because they grew up outside of Vietnam, they never learned to read the language. I've met many young Vietnamese Americans who feel embarrassed that they can't read Vietnamese, but that's easy to fix. This video may also be helpful for Westerners just beginning to study Vietnamese, so I'll explain the logic behind some of the strange spellings that tend to confuse new learners. As an American who studied Vietnamese in a military language school, I can tell you that reading and writing are the easiest things about learning this language, unlike Chinese, for example. One reason is that a couple of hundred years ago, a French scholar working with Vietnamese scholars developed a Romanized alphabet to replace the Chinese characters that were in use for many years. This had two benefits. Number one, the literacy rate among Vietnamese citizens went up sharply. And number two, it made it much easier for foreigners to learn the language. Chinese, on the other hand, still primarily uses characters, which makes it a much more difficult language to learn. In this video, I'll go over the entire Vietnamese alphabet, first focusing on the vowels, then the consonant combinations, and finally the tone marks. It really isn't that difficult, but there are quite a few odd structures that I'll go over, and differences in pronunciation between the various regions of Vietnam that I'll also point out. I should note that I learned Hanoi dialect, or North Vietnamese, Dien Bac in Vietnamese. And I'm aware that many Vietnamese Americans speak Southern dialect, or Dien Nam, or Saigon dialect. My wife is from Da Nang in central Vietnam, and her dialect has all kinds of weird things going on. But not to worry, the differences between the regional dialects are more a matter of pronunciation rather than vocabulary, and I'll try to explain these as we go along also. If you have questions or special requests about any part of this lesson, please let me know in the comments and I'll try to respond or possibly make a follow-up video if necessary. One last thing before we get started. I'm trying to keep this fairly simple so you can quickly learn to read Vietnamese properly. I could go into much more detail about some of the obscure rules and spellings of words that are rarely used, but it's really not necessary if you just want to understand the basics. So let's get right to it. This is the Vietnamese alphabet. The first thing you might notice is all the extra vowels with weird marks on them. Those are technically called diacritics, not tone marks. They're part of the letter, and I'll explain each one as we get to them. Another thing you might notice is that a few letters are missing. Vietnamese has no F, J, W, or Z. It's actually a simpler writing system than English since it was developed specifically to represent how Vietnamese is spoken, so there are very few exceptions like the many we have with English spellings. The problem with English is that most of our words were taken from Latin, Greek, German, French, and other languages, so there are a lot of strange spellings and silent letters. You won't find that problem with Vietnamese. So let's get to the vowels. Before we look at each vowel, it's important to know that Vietnamese has long vowels and short vowels. The difference between them is how they interact with other letters in a word. In general, long vowels are pronounced longer and short vowels are pronounced shorter. I'll give some examples as we go over each one. Vietnamese has three A's. A and The first two are pronounced A, with the difference being that the regular A is a long vowel and the A with a saucer on it is a short vowel. Actually, the regular A can also be a short vowel when combined with another long vowel, and I'll explain that a little later. The letter with a hat on it is pronounced like UH, and is also a short vowel. Since the first two A's are pronounced virtually the same, Vietnamese people say the letter A with no tone and the letter A with an upward tone, or zao sac, to differentiate between them. They also pronounce the with an upward tone. Here's an example to understand the difference between the long and short vowels. These two words, mang and mang, are similar, but to a Vietnamese speaker they are very different. Mang, to bring something, is pronounced with an open and long ah sound. But mang, bamboo shoot, has a much shorter ah sound. Think of it as the amount of time it takes to move on to the next letter in the word. With mang, we hold the ah sound longer, mang. But with mang, we move quickly to the ng sound, mang. You hear I'm exaggerating, but that's generally how you can learn to practice to hear the difference. The ng is elongated as opposed to the a. Mang versus mang. Now the is a little strange, the a with the hat on it. Most people don't teach it this way, but here's how I understand it. Is a short vowel, and its long counterpart is actually the letter the O with the whisker on it, which is also pronounced like a UH. A good example are the words gum, which means rice, or food in some cases, and gum, which means mute. Some people will probably disagree with me about this because the letter is often pronounced slightly more like an O, especially in the South. But I still find this the easiest way to explain the two letters. So in the South, when they say gum, the word for rice, they might say it a little bit more like gum, but not a big deal. On to the E's. The regular E with no diacritics on it is pronounced eh, like EH. And the E with the hat on it is pronounced A, like way or day. The I and the Y are fairly easy. They're both pronounced E. The I, or y ngan in Vietnamese, is a short vowel. The word ngan means short. And the Y, y zai, is a long vowel. The word zai means long. When these are combined with other vowels, we can easily see the difference between long and short vowels. As an example, the words hi, the number 2, and hai, which means or. Notice the emphasis on the ah in hai, and the emphasis on the y in hai. Again, the number 2 is hai, and or is hai. The ah is the same, it's just you're pronouncing it a little shorter when you say hai. Moving right along, there are 3 O's. The plain O with no diacritics is pronounced aw, kind of like the word law. The O with a hat on it is pronounced O. It's a long O. The O with a whisker on it is pronounced and as I mentioned before, it is the long counterpart to the letter the A with the hat on it. There are 2 U's. The regular U is pronounced oo. The U with a whisker on it is a little tricky for some people to pronounce. I found the easiest way to teach people the correct pronunciation is to have them try to say the oo sound, but while smiling. Oo. Once you can make the correct sound, you don't really have to smile, though. So basically, if you're saying the oo sound normally, your lips form a circle, a small circle. It comes out oo. But if you try to make that sound while smiling, you can't do it. So this is what happens. Ooh, ooh, ooh. And that's the sound we're trying to get. Ooh. Now, clearly, you're going to look a little silly if you always smile whenever you say ooh. Once you're used to that sound and you can repeat it without smiling, go ahead and do so. It'll still come out the same. Ooh, like that. In fact, it's very common when Vietnamese people are talking to each other. When you acknowledge, basically saying, yeah, you might say the word ooh with a down tone. Ooh, it's just the letter U with the whisker. So before moving on to the consonants, you should be aware that there are many combinations of vowels called diphthongs, which are 2 vowels together, and triphongs, which are 3 vowels together. No, it's not if you trip over your wife's thong that she left on the floor. Just kidding. A lot of them are straightforward. So I won't go over them all, but I do want to touch on a few of the more common ones. We already saw I and I as examples of how the long and short I and Y work. This is a diphthong. Two vowels together. This is also a good example of how the regular A can be either long or short. I mentioned that earlier. When combined with the short I, the A is more dominant, as in the word high. But with the Y, the A is shorter, and the Y is dominant, as in high. You'll also see diphthongs ow, ow, and ow quite often. Sao, star, or Y, sao, which means after, and sao, which means deep, are good examples. The differences are subtle, especially between ow and ow, but native Vietnamese speakers can definitely hear them, and it's easy to be misunderstood if you pronounce them wrong. Ui and ui are also good examples of the short I and the long Y when combined with the letter U. So the word pocket is tui, and the word though is tui. You hear the difference? Tui, tui. The difference being how long you're dwelling on the U sound and if you're emphasizing the E sound or not. So there are a few triphthongs that are very common. One is ui, u-e, as in the word người, person. You'll hear that quite often. I-e-u, I-a-u, e-a-u, eu, as in hew, to understand. U-o-e, which is ui, as in tuổi, age. And another one, not so common, but the word is fairly common. U-u, yo. It's a little tricky, but it's in the word zio, or in the South they would pronounce it rio. Rio means liquor, alcohol. There are quite a few more than these, but they are less common, and you should be able to figure out their pronunciations without too much trouble. Now let's get to the consonants. As we look at the simple alphabet, the first thing you might notice that's odd about the consonants are the Ds. There are two of them. The one with the cross through it is pronounced like a D in English. The non-crossed D is pronounced like a Z in Northern dialect and like a Y in most of the South. Example, tuk zai, to wake up. In the South they would say tuk yai. Most of the other letters are similar to English, with some exceptions. C is pronounced like a K, never like an S, like the word cycle in English, for example. It's always pronounced like a K. P is only pronounced like a P when it's at the end of a word. Hup fap, which means legal. Now, you won't say hup, P like in English, where like we say hope. You just close your mouth, so it's hup. Fap. With fap, you see that at the beginning of the word, it's the F sound because it's combined with an H. So, like I said, at the beginning of words, it's combined with the H to form the F sound. So you've got the words fa, to destroy, and fien, to bother. Now for the R. Northerners will pronounce it like a Z. Actually, North Vietnamese pronounce quite a few letters like a Z, but you kind of get used to it. Most Southerners will pronounce the R a little more like an English R or a rolled R, like that, but not too often that way. So the word zoi already, in Northern pronunciation, zoi. In Southern, roi. Zio, as I mentioned, or rio in the South. Those are a couple of examples. If you want to ask what time is it, it will be pronounced quite differently in the North and the South. In the North, they will say me za zoi, me za zoi. Now again, the GI sound is pronounced like a Z up north, and so is the R. So you get the sound me za zoi. In the South, it'll sound more like me ya roi. Now you hear the difference. The GI is pronounced like a Y, but the R is pronounced more like an R. Me ya roi. There are also regions where the R is pronounced sort of between a Z and an R, like a ZH sound, like joy, but that's not quite as common. The letter V is pronounced the same as in English in northern dialects, but in Central and South Vietnam it's more often pronounced like a Y. So the word happy is vui in the north, yui in the south. The word Vietnam, Vietnam in the north, Vietnam in the south. The X is pronounced the same as an S. You just have to memorize which words use X and which use S. There may be a slight difference in some parts of Central Vietnam, for example. The S may sound a little bit more like an SH, but honestly, in most cases, I can't tell the difference, and it's best to just memorize which words are spelled with an X or an S. Of course, if you're reading, no problem. It's just pronounced like an S. Now, consonant combinations. There are quite a few consonants that are combined, like we have combinations in English, like CH and so on. A very important thing to understand is the difference between a single T and the TH in Vietnamese. A T by itself is non-aspirated. That means you don't breathe out after saying it. Some people think of it like a hard D, like that. The TH, however, is aspirated. If you think of how we pronounce the name Tom in English, a Vietnamese phonetic spelling would be Thom, and it would be pronounced Tom. I had a Vietnamese teacher who showed my class the difference between the T without the H and the T with the H by holding a piece of paper up to his mouth while pronouncing the two different T's. I'll demonstrate that now. The word I is toi, T-O-I. The word enough or stop is toi, T-H-O-I. They're spelled the same, but one has an H. Now, if I say the word toi with a piece of paper in front of my mouth, you'll see the paper doesn't move. Toi, toi. Now, if I do the same thing and say the word toy, watch what happens. Toy, toy, because the breath of air is coming out after I say the T. As I said, with the name Tom, if you were to spell it T-O-M in Vietnamese, a Vietnamese person would read that as Tom. If you want them to pronounce Tom as Tom, you should spell it T-H-O-M, Tom. You'll also see T combined with R to make the TR combination. This one's a little tricky and varies by regional dialect. In North Vietnamese, the TR sound is very similar to CH, and you shouldn't worry too much about it if you pronounce them the same way. The difference between the words chung, which means center, and chung, which means generally, is very subtle in the North. And one way to understand the difference is to think of the TR as being a little harder, almost like a J sound, J, and the CH a little lighter, like ch in English. The difference is more obvious in parts of Central and South Vietnam, where TR sounds like TR in English. The word inside is trong. They may pronounce it in the South like trong, otherwise chong. The CH is pronounced just like a CH in English. But remember this, when it's at the end of a word, it's pronounced more like a K or CK ending. You'll need to know that words ending in ACH are pronounced like Ike, not ache or ack. So you've got the word for book is psych, or the word for a coffee cup or a teacup is tyke. You have that I sound instead, it changes the A. G is another one that you need to know a few rules about. It's usually pronounced the same as an English G, except when it's in front of an I, like in the words Z and zone. That's northern pronunciation. So in the north, when it's combined with an I, it's pronounced like a Z. In southern dialects, it's pronounced more like a Y. So in the south, they would say yi and yong. If it's not combined with an I, it's pronounced like a G in English. So you've got the words ga, go, gop, and gai. Now we need to combine the G with an H to get the G sound before the letters I, E, and the E with a hat on it, A. So we have the words gi, ge, gegum. Now that last one, gegum, is a compound word, which means awful or terrible. You'll notice that the first word, ge, is G-H-A, because of the rule. We need that H before the E with the hat on it. The second word in gegum is gum. We don't have that rule that we need the H before the O with the whisker on it, so that's just pronounced like a G. Gum. Again, gegum. Same sound, different spellings. This H rule also applies to the combination NG, the NG sound. If it comes before an I, an E, or an E with the hat on it, you need to add that extra H. So we have the words ngi, which means to think, nge, which means to hear or listen, and nge, profession. That's another compound word. I put it in there to show you both words require the H in there because you've got the letter A and the letter E after the, immediately after the NG sound. Now, since I mentioned the NG combinations, I should point out that for many foreigners learning Vietnamese, it's difficult to make the NG sound at the beginning of words. This shouldn't be a problem for those of you who grew up speaking Vietnamese, so please bear with me for a moment. If you can't seem to say NG at the beginning of a word, maybe it keeps coming out as an N or an NY, ny sound, try this. Say the word singing. Now say singing. I know it's not a word, it's a little silly, but now try singing, and so on. Now just drop the SI at the beginning of the word, and you've got ning. If you're still saying ning or nying, try whispering the si sound when you say singing, and then say the ning part out loud. Singing, 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 singing. And then try to drop the si part. Ning, ning, ning. Eventually you should be able to get it. With enough practice, you won't have any trouble. Now, try the common words ngon, which means delicious. If someone asks you if you like your food, you want to say ngon, ngon. Nghĩ, to think, or người, person. Again, very common word. NG at the end of words is pronounced just like an NG in English. The NH combination is pronounced like NY, ny, when at the beginning of a word, as in the word nya, house, very common word. Easy enough, right? When you see it at the end of a word, the pronunciation is different depending on whether you speak Northern or Southern dialect. In Northern dialect, it's pronounced like NG in English. So the word cute, which is sing, or the word nail, which is ding, sounds just like we were saying sing, S-I-N-G, or ding, D-I-N-G. That's in Northern dialect. In the South, it'll sound more like an N. Sin, din. It's a little more complicated than that. There's a subtle, it's a soft N sound, so it's different than sin and sin. But really, for our purposes, you just need to know that in the South, it's going to sound a little bit just more like an N. For example, the name Ho Chi Minh. In the North, Ho Chi Minh. In the South, Ho Chi Minh. So, depending on the speaker's dialect, you're going to hear those things pronounced a little bit differently. The NH also, at the end of a word, also changes the A sound. So if the word ends in ANH, similar to how the ACH is pronounced Ike, the ANH is pronounced Ein. So the word ANH, Ein, means older brother. It means you or I, depending on who you're talking to or who's speaking to you. Ein. Banh mi, bread or sandwich, very common word. Again, you won't say banh mi or banh mi, it's banh mi. In the South, it'll sound a little softer, maybe banh mi, bun, but basically, if you stick with more that I sound, you'll be pronouncing it correctly and people will understand you. Those are a couple of good examples. Now, K is often combined with H, so you get the KH sound. It's kind of its own consonant, and it's pronounced kind of in the back of the throat, different from an H, which is just So what you want to do, you want to close your tongue a bit near the back of your throat, almost like you're almost going to swallow, and you'll get that, breathe out, and you'll get that sound. You don't have to sound like you're getting ready to spit. You know, you don't have to. That's overkill in Vietnamese. And in Arabic languages, there are differences between and but in Vietnamese, you just want to make it a kind of a hard H, a hard H. I don't want to go too far with that. But anyways, the most common KH word is going to be không, which means no or not. It's also a question. It turns a sentence into a question if you put it at the end of a word. Không. Now, there are some more spelling rules than these, but they're less commonly seen. If you can remember the rules I just taught you, you're 90% there already. Now for the tones. I know some people are afraid of this. Vietnamese has 6 tones. Actually, there are 5 tone marks plus a neutral or level tone, which doesn't require a tone mark. The word for tone in Vietnamese is zao in the north or yao in the south. And the tone marks are always placed over or under a vowel. The upward tone, zao sak, is written like this. The downward tone, zao huyen, is written like this. The question mark tone, zao hỏi, is written like this. Actually, the word hỏi means to ask, and zao hỏi means a question mark. So it makes sense that this tone mark looks like a question mark without the dot under it. And when pronounced, it sounds like you're asking a question. Hỏi. The broken tone, zao ngã, is written like this. It's a tilde in English. The dot tone, zao nang, is written like this. So the word ma, M-A, has at least 6 different meanings depending on the tone. Ma, ghost. Ma, cheek or mother. Ma, however, but. Ma, grave, like in Moma. Ma, horse or code. Maaso means code. And ma, which is a rice seedling, a small rice plant. Now, if you speak Northern dialect, each of these 6 tones is pronounced distinctly, different from the others, which is one reason many foreigners choose to learn North Vietnamese dialect. There's less chance of being misunderstood when you speak. In Southern dialect, the zao ngã, that tilde sound, sounds the same as the zao hỏi, the question mark. So, for example, if you say excuse me in Vietnamese, in the North, it's pronounced xin lỗi, xin lỗi. And in the South, it's xin lỗi, a little softer. Also, in some areas of South Vietnam, the dot tone, the zao nang, can also sound like a zao hỏi. It's soft. Example, the word for wife in the North, vợ. In the South, it sounds a little softer, vợ. To confuse things even more, there are parts of central Vietnam where most of the tones are pronounced different from each other. An example is the dialect spoken in and around the city of Hue in central Vietnam, where words with the zao sak, the uptone, sound very much like the zao hỏi. So simply the words zao sak in Hue will sound like zao sak. Very, very difficult for some people to understand, but if you live there, you'll probably get used to hearing it and even maybe pronounce it that way. So that's the basic explanation of Vietnamese tone marks. My advice to anyone just starting out learning Vietnamese, whatever dialect you study, stick with that dialect's pronunciation. If you're learning Northern Hanoi dialect, don't try to mix in Southern pronunciations of some words. If you're learning Southern or Saigon dialect, don't mix in Northern pronunciation. It will only confuse native Vietnamese speakers who normally adjust their expectations of how you'll pronounce words. I also wouldn't recommend starting out learning a central dialect like Hue, Da Nang, Quang Nam, Quang Ngai, unless you're living and working there, since these are the hardest for many Vietnamese people to understand outside of those regions. Yet people from the central regions usually don't have any trouble understanding both northern and southern dialects, mainly because they hear it on TV all the time. That's it for this video. I hope I was able to help some of you get a better understanding of how Vietnamese is written. If so, please click like, and again, I welcome any comments or suggestions you might have. If there's interest, I may follow up with a shorter video explaining how to write Vietnamese on a computer or cell phone so that the tone marks and diacritics show up. That's it for now. Xin chào các bạn. Hẹn gặp lại.
Trời Tây rộng miền Trung